Welcome to Health versus Wealth with Dr. Ben, where each week it's my great pleasure to meet fascinating people who tell us about the challenges they're facing with their work-life balance. I'm Dr. Ben Sinclair, and I wonder, do you struggle with your priorities? On the one hand, focusing on your work, business or career, namely your wealth, or on the other hand, looking after your health, which is so important. Over the past 20 years as a GP, I've seen many people spending too long on their screens, cutting corners on their sleep, diet or exercise. The result? Their work life's going well, but their health can suffer. I sincerely hope that my guests' personal and professional experiences may help you to improve your own health and life. My truly remarkable guest today is a double amputee and an MBE. He's well known as a keynote speaker. He's very popular on the after-dinner speaker circuit. He's a director of corporate workshops and a program director, a conference facilitator, author, and a motivator, whose expertise lies in helping others to improve their performance and resilience. Now, he overcomes physical challenges daily. Having lost his arm and a leg, travelling to the Midlands today from his home in Scotland wasn't a problem for him. In fact, he's travelled much more widely, having delivered moving and inspiring talks on every continent in over 100 countries, addressing audiences of all ages from schoolchildren to CEOs. So how has he managed all this, you might ask, and why is he so remarkable? Well, because over the past 30 years, my special guest has overcome adversity to triumph again and again. He's a former British Army officer who was blown up in Africa whilst clearing landmines for a charity. But becoming a double amputee didn't put him off his stride in life. Quite the opposite. Now, less than a year after leaving hospital, he completed the London Marathon. And now, at the age of 62, he completes the world's most gruelling ultramarathons. Amazingly, also, he's one of few Westerners to have survived being taken prisoner by Cambodia's ruthless Khmer Rouge guerrillas. So it's no surprise he sums up all this by declaring, "I'm one of the luckiest people to be alive whom you're likely to meet." So Chris Moon MBE, we thank you for your service and welcome.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here, Dr. Ben.
So what has working around the world taught you about ourselves and people in other countries?
I've been privileged to visit every continent, and I've learned that our similarities are greater than our differences, and we should focus on them now more than ever.
Now, I hear your journey began in Wiltshire and you wanted to become a farmer?
Yeah, I grew up in a farming family. I knew nothing else, and everyone in my family, they were either fighters or farmers. So they were either soldiers or farmers, and I love that connection with nature and animals. And I grew up on my uncle's farm. Unfortunately, there was no land or money in my bit of the family, so I came up with a plan, which was to work incredibly hard and get into a partnership. And at the age of 21, I'd achieved my life's ambition. I was in a farming partnership.
And then what happened?
Well, my business partner, he had the most wonderful attitude to work. And he said, when you get up in the morning, you got to get your head in the right place. Because we get up at 4 o'clock in the summer, we work until 11. So you always have your head in the right place. And he said, you need to look after yourself mentally and physically. Make the effort to reach out to people to have that contact so you don't get stale. And unfortunately, there was just one piece of the jigsaw he missed, and that was looking after his long-term health. He literally wore out his knees and his hips. And in his 50s, he was struggling to get around. So I realized that I worried about him for months. I didn't realize anything, to be honest. And then I knew that we couldn't continue. So I said to him one morning, I'm going to leave and do something different, and you can sell up and enjoy your money.
Oh,
which he did, and he lived happily ever after until he was 92.
Oh, that's a nice end to the story, despite being not able to continue working.
Yeah, well, he could in a sort of semi-retired way, and without the pressure of me buying him out. It took all the pressure off. So it was a happy ending, and the opportunity for me, out of every disappointment I've experienced, there's been a greater opportunity, and it will be that way if we look for it. So I wanted to do something humanitarian.
Right, okay. Now, before that, you took a degree in agricultural college and you ended up in the British Army. So
yeah.
What drew you to the service?
Well, I wanted to do something humanitarian. I learned something from my grandfather, who was an officer in the First World War, my dad, an army commando in the Second World War. They both taught me something about human nature. The mark of the individual is not what they do, It is what they would do if they didn't think they would be found out. And so I was commissioned into the military police, and I believe very firmly that we have to be able to stand up against evil, and people need to be held accountable. I did 3 years in counter-terrorist operations, stopping people being blown up. That was something I wanted to continue, so I left and went to work for a charity clearing landmines.
Wow, so you've been doing quite a lot of these very clear-cut sort of good and evil activities. You sound like you have a strong values base.
Yes, I think I was brought up with that and given it by my parents, and I wanted to do something that was of service and that would help people. And if we can do something that helps others in their journey through life, then it will add value and meaning to our own.
So you mentioned landmines. Where did that take you?
Well, I went to Cambodia, and I was working for the Halo Trust clearing landmines. I was very good at it. I found exactly what we were looking for.
And essentially, what were you looking for?
Landmines and IEDs. We were teaching local people how to clear them. We went in and set up training programs and managed the operations. Now they're running the biggest operation in the world.
It's huge, isn't it? In fact, when I was after I finished my GP training, I went to Cambodia, and I remember regularly hearing these sort of thump, explosions in the background, because I think it was CMAC then who were, they were just blowing up, all the ordnance that had been discovered in these little controlled explosions constantly. And apparently is it 27 million items of ordnance unexploded, so that's like 3 per person.
Yeah, something like that. The figure is enormous, and the clearance is still going on.
And it's such a blight, isn't it? I remember walking down these little paths, talking to villagers, and there were big signs. There were no fences, and I said, "Well, hang on, what about the kids? Don't they need to be protected from mines?" And they just said, "Well, we teach them not to go there, and there are enough people around missing limbs or who have been killed for them to know that they just don't go there."
Yes, it's interesting what people get used to, isn't it? It just becomes a risk that we, after a while, I suppose familiarity breeds contempt, but you get used to it, and they live with that on a daily basis.
You don't realise the risk when you're living in a safe country, with this kind of thing not surrounding you. The risk to us might be, a car on the road or something like an illness, as opposed to something very real that's you might step on or stumble across.
Yeah, I think landmines are a really good example of something Einstein said. Our technology has advanced faster than our humanity, and it seems to be roaring that way at a massive rate of knots at the moment. I think it's time for our humanity to catch up.
And it actually put me off, because I was in the Territorial Army at university, I was in the engineering section, and we were learning about how to sort of lay mines for maximum damage. And I was thinking, as a doctor, I get that we've got to protect ourselves, but I just felt quite uncomfortable using an indiscriminate piece of ordnance. They were trying to recruit me as a sniper, and I kind of understood that because I could see the enemy down my scope, and I was good at shooting. But in the end, I sort of decided to part ways with the forces. And
well, I think stopping people being taken apart is far more noble than taking them apart. But also, I would hope that one day humankind will come to realise our greatest enemy is not another religion, another nationality, or another state. It is the violence itself.
And I think listening to you talking, your insight has probably pulled you into some very interesting thinking and brought you into more of the sort of motivational area, because you're coming to the core of what it is to be a human being.
Yes, and I think it raises a fascinating question. What makes us the people we are? Well, having studied human behaviour, the year after I was blown up, I did a master's. The debate in academia is nature versus nurture. It is a combination of our genes and the experiences we have and the people who influence us, our education, the way we're brought up. But personally, I think that's a very incomplete debate. The huge and most important element is choice. We are who we choose to be, and not even recognising that and making a choice is a choice in itself. So we have far more choices than we realise, and I have, when it comes to difficulty, I've been the way, and I know the way, and I can show the way. So I'm very driven to share what I've learned. I've been to some really unusual places, and I've run some very tough races, and I want to share that because we can all do more than we think.
And I know we've both been in Cambodia. Our experience was quite different because I was there after the Khmer Rouge period. You were there during it, and I believe you were captured. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I was given a guarantee of security by the United Nations when we were asked to clear landmines in a remote border village. They said there was no way the Khmer Rouge could get near us, but the Khmer Rouge did something, in spite of there being 3 infantry battalions in that area, that no one had predicted. They sent special forces through the jungle. I was driving back through a clearing when we were ambushed. It was incredibly aggressive. There were 30 heavily armed Khmer Rouge guerrillas. Then there's a cut-off group behind us of about 12. There was no way you could turn around and drive out of the ambush. You were caught like rats in a trap. We were not going to be held for a long time. The people in the village where we were working were told by the Khmer Rouge that I was being taken to be interrogated and executed. I was held for 3 days with 2 Cambodian colleagues, and I managed to persuade them to not execute us, to release us. And when I got back to the village in the middle of the night, because the local people in the rural areas believe ghosts come out of the forest at night, they believed I was a ghost, and they all ran away from me. And eventually the only way I could convince them I was alive was I caught the village chief and licked his face.
You licked his face?
Well, I couldn't think of anything else to do.
It's pretty visceral.
Well, he then believed me, and then I don't think he was very impressed. But he was just overjoyed that we were alive, and he said that no one had ever come back alive. It was remarkable. The thing that I remember most about it, with the Khmer Rouge, was this feeling of evil. And did you go to S21?
Yes.
The interrogation centre, which shows you what the Khmer Rouge were like. 17,000 people killed, murdered and executed. But what I learned is courage is not about the absence of fear. It is about overcoming our fear and doing what we know is right and moving into the light.
Welcome back to Health versus Wealth with Dr. Ben. My guest today, Chris Moon, is an MBE, a double amputee who's overcome these challenges and is now a motivational speaker and author. Now, you were working for the Halo Trust in Mozambique in 1995 when your life changed forever. What happened?
I was doing the least dangerous thing I ever did. I was walking back up a safe lane where all the landmines had been removed. But it wasn't possible for the guys to locate one, and as a result I had my right arm and leg blown off. I was incredibly lucky to survive, but I got written off as dead on my Kazvak. But I always said if my guys missed a landmine, I wanted to be the first to know about it, but it wasn't quite what I meant.
You really did find it for them.
Yes. There's one over here.
And so I love the humour that you bring to your experiences, and I think that's one of your key survival techniques.
It is, undoubtedly. I think it was also something that I should thank the Army for, learning to laugh in the face of adversity. And humour is our greatest coping mechanism. When we laugh and we smile, it produces endorphins. People actually who smile and laugh a lot live about 7 years longer, 10 years longer. And if you think about it, it's really easy to test. What they did was they looked at college football photographs in the US from the 1910s and 20s, and then they looked to see when people died. And the big smilers were, on average, living 7 to 10 years longer.
Wow. Although I suppose the big smilers might have been paid more and then lived longer as a result of that.
It is possible.
Who knows?
I mean, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? But when we smile, I think, how do you feel? How do you feel when you smile and you laugh?
Feel good. Yeah, and I'm with you on the endorphin front. I think, the benefits of smiling and humour are there for all of us to take. We just have to operate them more and claim the benefits. Now, you mentioned Kazvak. So for those of you who aren't military, that's evacuating a casualty from an emergency. What happened to you? Was it a helicopter? Was it a truck? How did you get out of it?
I was very lucky. Although we were operating in a very remote part of northern Mozambique, there was a helicopter in the area, so I got taken to a local hospital within about an hour. But there, they couldn't stop the bleeding. And in the minefield, we had really good medical training, so I treated myself. That was the reason I survived the first bit. My veins collapsed. They couldn't get drip lines into me. And so I decided, because I had body armour on, I had no stomach injuries, so there wasn't a risk of it going through into my lungs and drowning me. So I drank 2 litres of Ringer's solution, blood replacement, a warm saline.
Okay.
And I felt as if life had been poured back into me. I could actually feel that I was dying. And then when I got that down my neck, I literally felt revived. You could actually feel it going through the gut wall because it's isotonic.
Wow. So you were literally drinking fluids to rehydrate your falling blood pressure that was leaking out because you were bleeding.
Yeah, and the surgeon who treated me in South Africa thinks that was the only reason that I lived, to get to that hospital. But then they couldn't stop the bleeding.
It's the presence of mind to do that at the time. I mean, you must have been... How did it feel? Did you think clearly at that point?
Yeah, I knew I had to if I was going to live. And that's why I wouldn't let them give me any morphine. And I had to live. And I think you've got to focus when you know you're dying and you're going. And there will be a time for all of us when that happens. Death is nothing to fear. The death mechanism is pleasant. You start sinking into a warm pool. You go to a familiar place and you start to see familiar people, and you go up and up and up. And I can remember being outside my body looking down when I got to South Africa. And I can remember being very confused because the paramedic was feeling my neck for a pulse. And I couldn't work out why I couldn't feel him touching my neck. And then I was disassociated. I was outside looking down. But I spoke to an anaesthetist when I was speaking at a conference a week or so ago. And he said that he has revived people. And several times they've said to him, I saw you doing this to me, and they described exactly what he'd done. So it's not just me that has had this experience, there are others.
And I think it's some people who are present enough, as you were, they are aware of this sort of near-death experience and often come outside of their body. We don't know how they're able to hear conversations in other parts of the building or see things that aren't physically possible. It strikes me that there are other dimensions to our being that we don't fully understand, that science can't test
yet. I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I think quantum physics is starting to give some answers. Energy can't be destroyed. It simply changes its form. So what does it change into? But there are undoubtedly other dimensions, and there's a lot that we don't understand, and I keep an open mind on it.
Absolutely. And I think open-mindedness is key. Well, it's a growth mindset, isn't it, what you're talking about? And you epitomise this growth mindset. Now, coming to other things that you've done, the year after you'd had your leg blown off, you defied the doctors and you ran the London Marathon incredibly.
Yes, I was initially told that I wouldn't be able to run, but what is our most precious resource in life? It's time. And so that's why I was determined in that first year, because I was so lucky to be alive, to live life. And that's why I did my marathon within a year of living in hospital, because also the positive to being blown up was that I knew that if I could run that marathon, I would raise a lot of money. I'd get the sympathy vote on the fundraising, and I'd raise money for a school in Cambodia to teach people who've been injured by landmines how to earn a living.
Fantastic. Now, did you get a good time in the marathon? How did it go?
Well, I can say I ran it. I did 5.5 hours, which in those days with artificial legs not being as good as they are now was, I really feel, a best effort. I did do a best effort, and I thought I was doing really well until I got to about the 11-mile point when I was passed by a very large gentleman in a chicken suit.
Amazing.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, we are all a bit ridiculous, and you've got to laugh at yourself. Don't be the centre of your own universe. See beyond self.
Exactly. And also, I love that quote from Baz Luhrmann. He's like, in the end, the race is long, but it's only against yourself.
Well, that's true. I don't want to run faster than anybody else. I just want to run faster than myself. Exactly.
And so, I mean, a PB with new legs. Now, after that, you got an MBE from the Queen. What was it like meeting her?
Remarkable. I understand why the word gracious is in the national anthem. Absolutely charming. It was a very lovely day, and it was nice for my parents. It was for service to the Halo Trust clearing anti-personnel mines, so it was a wonderful thing to have.
Fantastic. I think it's so good when we do honour people who do incredible things, and at the same time, I think there's so many unsung heroes that we don't hear about. But it's nice to hear that your parents got the chance to actually, see the work that you've been done respected. So that's lovely. Now, you stay healthy as an endurance runner still, and you host workshops and you do public speaking. What sort of topics do you cover in both those areas?
Well, I'm very passionate about talking about resilience and sharing experiences. I've got lots of experience on the balance of life and death and limit of human endurance. And what is useful about those experiences is there is absolute clarity, and any pretense we have as human beings is removed. And I can share principles that will enable people to make the best of their lives and rise above the things that drag us down, because that's our challenge in life, to rise above the things that drag us down.
Absolutely. Now, Chris, in the introduction, I mentioned that you are a public speaker, that you've spoken in all 7 continents and over 100 countries. What sort of topics are you speaking on, and who are your audiences?
Audiences vary from schools to groups of CEOs, large corporate organizations. No set audience, but that's the whole spectrum, any group of people. And I'm very passionate about it, and I love being involved with people and sharing experiences that will enable them to be more adaptable, to change, to be more resilient, to actually do things that they didn't think they could do, to feel better about themselves. That's hugely important, and how both in their personal lives and their professional lives they can make the best of life.
I love that whole personal professional sort of balance. We often at Dr. Finley's talk about the work-life balance, or even integration. These days often we're trying to live life and work at the same time, and I feel like those have almost kind of meshed after the lockdown with the technology pulling us into work in our home lives. How do you think the work life has changed for the people you're talking to over the time that you've been doing this motivational
There has
speaking?
been a huge change. When I started speaking 30 years ago, things were much more structured, and it was a really interesting time because mobile phones were only just coming in. So I've been privileged to have gone from that period when much of the communication was written, and that in itself gave a lot of clarity. And now emails can be fired off, and if you look in a lot of people's email boxes, it would be fascinating to see how many of those emails really have value. And I much prefer face-to-face communication. That's how we change. We're human beings. We're meant to be together. And after lockdown, it was amazing speaking at conferences. And I'm still doing conferences now where I'm doing, say, an hour's keynote. And it is remarkable because people are seeing each other sometimes for the first time, although they might have been working together for 4 years. It's absolutely incredible, but it's wonderful to see people getting together. That energy, that dynamic of face-to-face communication is something that you can't get electronically.
And I agree that the chemistry you find, you become greater than the sum of your parts when you meet together physically.
That's very true. There is that energy, and we share that energy. And that's what we try to do in all the workshops that I run, to actually get people to join together, in which they will be functioning much greater than the sum of their parts. The power of people coming together is force multiplying, and it's about getting into that space. But you can't get people into that space unless we start by getting them, both personally and professionally, to get their head in the right place.
Lovely. And at Dr. Finley's, we often look after CEOs and people in business. I've got a copy of your book, One Step Beyond, here on the table. So if there's any CEOs looking for inspiration, do look up Chris's book.
Thank you.
Are there any other sort of pieces of information or guidance you would give to someone if they are, let's say, approaching a challenge in life? What would your advice be?
Firstly, don't focus on the fear. Focus on where you want to be, on what your aim is. Use the power of belief, because if you don't believe you're going to get there, you won't. So use the power of belief and recognize the most important psychological discovery ever is that we choose the way we think. And the way we think determines how we feel. It may not always feel like that when we face challenges in life, but it is true. We choose the way we think, and we need to think in a way that will enable us to get where we want to be.
Profound wisdom. Thank you, Chris. And one thing that I've come across recently is lots of books about manifesting. Mm-hmm. People talking about psychological priming to almost connect you to the universe, to sort of help you to seek out the things you need to do the things you want to do. What do you think about that concept?
I think it is very similar to the concept that I mentioned earlier with my business partner, the farmer, who said, get your head in the right place. Because when we get our head in the right place, when we are able to think about what we're doing, when we can have this relaxed state of concentration, of being 100% where we are, then things start to fit into place. So I think that is the challenge. Be 100% where we are and focus on things that are constructive and positive. And how do we solve our problems? It's through asking constructive and positive questions. It's not just about going the way, because we need to know the way, but on our journey, if we can do something that will help others, then our life will be more fulfilling. And recognize, what did becoming disabled teach me? Well, firstly, all my friends and family said Chris Moon's life is over, because everything in his life requires 2 arms and 2 legs. I've lived for my work. I was very passionate about clearing landmines. I'd found my place in the world. Hobbies, running, gardening, mountaineering, everything that requires 2 arms and 2 legs. But I have never had a down moment, because I recognize that nobody wants to be near a bitter and negative person. So I choose to be even more thankful for my left hand and my left leg, even more thankful for my eyes. The happiest people I know are the most grateful, and recognize that actually I don't want to be beaten by the badness. I want to move into the light, stay into the light, and in my journey through life, spread some sunshine and kindness. And I think we should all do that, because it will almost certainly be reflected back in far greater quantity, unless you're next to a psychopath, in which case I advise moving.
And there seem to be a few psychopaths around in the world at the moment, aren't there? Even more obvious because of social media. I think your lust for life is really interesting. And I actually I had a similar experience surviving cancer. Everything felt so much more important and real, and as you say, I suddenly realised I had choices. You could choose how you wanted to live, and live every day like you last, but plan like it wasn't. It was my motto.
I think what you're saying is really well demonstrated by Roosevelt's quote, in which he said, "It is not the critic who counts; it is the doer of the deeds, the man who's marred by sweat and dust and blood, who, at least if he fails whilst daring greatly." And basically, to abbreviate it, he ends up by saying, you haven't lived until you've almost died, for those who have had to fight for it. Life is truly a gift the protected will never know.
And I think if we don't step outside that comfort zone, we'll never know that, will we? Sometimes it's by accident, sometimes it's by deliberate intent we push ourselves.
Well, I guess that's a really good reason to do an ultra-distance race, because you go to that place and you always learn something there. So I became the world's first ultra-distance amputee runner, 97 when I did the Marathon des Sabres, and I'm still doing these things. Recently I did a 500-miler in 2 weeks, the Camino Way in Spain, which was enlightening, and you always learn something. And only a fool would say, I did the Camino Pilgrim Way in Spain and I conquered it. But what you can say, only a fool would say that. What you can say is, I did the 500 miles in the targeted 2 weeks, doing it about 3 times faster than most experienced walkers. And in so doing, I conquered something in myself.
Now, what's the name of your website?
Chris Moon, www.chrismoon.co.uk. Google me, Chris Moon MBE, or get me on LinkedIn, Chris Moon MBE.
Fantastic. That's pretty straightforward people to find. It's been fascinating talking to you, all of your exploits and experiences, the challenges you've had. It's very clear you've got enormous reserves of mental resilience and willpower. Now, sadly, we've run out of time today, but there's so much more I'd like to talk to you about and ask you about your own health now. I especially like to explore the topic of developing mental toughness. I think it applies to so many walks of life and business, as we both know. Could I ask you possibly to come back next week and tell us some more?
Yes, please, Dr. Ben. I would love to. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Chris, thank you so much for coming in today, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you.
So I do hope you enjoyed today's episode of Health versus Wealth with Dr. Ben, and I hope it may help you improve your life and health. You can also take one easy step by achieving that right now by subscribing free on your usual podcast platform. And if you'd like to be a guest on the show, you can email me on podcast@drfinlays.co.uk. I hope you'll join me again, but for now it's goodbye from me, Dr. Ben.